Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fast Pass the History Podcast in close to 30 minutes or less. As always, I'm Trevor.
Jason.
And I'm Megan.
And today we'll be talking about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There are a lot of conspiracies surrounding his assassination. I'd go so far as to say it's one of the biggest conspiracy theories in American history. There are just so many. I mean, was it the Soviet government, Israel, Cuba, the CIA, a shadow government, the Federal Reserve? Probably not the Federal Reserve, but there are just way too many wild theories, so we're only going to focus on the facts and the major theories in this episode.
Now, before we get into the assassination, let's get some background on John F. Kennedy and why people wanted to kill him. During the 1960 presidential election, it was John F. Kennedy versus Richard Nixon. This was a big election since this was the first time that television was widely used, which gave JFK an advantage over Nixon. That's because while Nixon was more well-spoken and had a better background in politics, he didn't really look good. At least compared to JFK. JFK was young, the youngest elected president ever, and he was pretty good looking.
I mean, his looks played a big part, as well as his views on family. JFK is all about the nuclear family, which is basically supposed to be the stereotypical American family. A husband, wife, 1 to 2 kids, typically a boy and a girl, maybe a dog, and they live in the suburbs. JFK basically had the nuclear family, and was a big supporter of that lifestyle.
The other major part of JFK's presidential campaign was his pro-civil rights stance. He supported the civil rights, but tried to balance the white Southern Democrats who weren't very pro-civil rights while trying to get the black Republican vote. So pro-civil rights enough to get the black vote, but not too pro-civil rights that the white Southerners would still vote for him. JFK did also help intervene when MLK got arrested close to the election. So he tried to balance the two sides, and while that may have helped get him elected, that also angered some people on both sides. Also just want to note here, this was around the time when the parties kind of swapped values, so Republicans were more liberal and Democrats more conservative. We can go into that detail another time. Also, after JFK was killed, MLK remembered him as a dear friend.
Now, let's break down the actual assassination and look at the timeline. It started just like any normal day. On November 22nd, 1963, JFK and his wife leave for Dallas on Air Force One at 11:20 a.m. and land at 11:38 a.m. 10 minutes later, he goes outside to greet the people at 11:46 a.m. The open-top motorcade leaves for Love Field at 11:52 a.m.
At 12:21 p.m., like an hour after he lands, the motorcade turned onto Main Street, and then at 12:27 p.m., it passed the Adolphus Hotel. 150,000 people were out and about trying to see the president. What a cute family moment to have. 3 minutes later, he was shot at 12:30 p.m. at Dallas Daily Plaza.
At 12:34, there was the first wire service announcement of the murder, and then at 12:40, CBS announced as breaking news. All the while, the president was being rushed to the hospital. He arrived there at 12:36 p.m. Alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald fled the book depository where he allegedly shot the president and went to his rented room, grabbed a pistol, and waited for a bus to who knows where.
For a bit of context about Lee Harvey Oswald, he was a Marine who defected to the Soviet Union and then defected back to the United States.
So while Lee's taking the bus, they called a Catholic priest to perform last rites on the now pronounced dead John Fitzgerald Kennedy at 1 o'clock p.m. At 1:03, the police take a roll call of the workers at the book depository, and then at 1:12 p.m., they find the rifle shells at the 6th floor window of the depository. And then literally 3 minutes later, another person is shot, Officer Tippit, in a different section of Dallas, Oak Cliff, after stopping a suspect on the street, which is very close to the apartment that Oswald was renting.
At 1:50 p.m., Oswald was captured after a struggle in the Texas Theater in Oak Cliff. Then at 2 p.m. at the Parkland Hospital, an employee finds a pristine bullet on a stretcher in the hallway, which he assumes is connected to the murder of the president. I mean, what does it mean, pristine bullet? I'm just assuming that it was an unfired round that fell out of his pocket, which kind of pointed in his direction.
Yeah, that bullet was pretty much the evidence for the magic bullet theory that was a one shot, one kill, one guy injured kind of thing. Anyway, the magic bullet theory was debunked, but they took another look at it and found that it was at least scientifically possible, but at the time was the leading theory. So at 2:20 p.m., Oswald was interrogated by the Dallas police, and about 18 minutes later, Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in on Air Force One at 2:38 p.m.
An hour and a half later, at 4 p.m., Oswald's wife was interviewed by the police and they searched her home as well. At 7:10 p.m. that night, Oswald is charged with the murder of Officer Tippit, not Kennedy yet. They have a press showing of him at midnight on the 23rd. Then an hour and a half later, they also charge him with the murder of JFK at 1:30 a.m. Oswald is identified as the owner of the rifle they found at the depository at 4 a.m. Now they got their guy. But then, November 24th, 1963 happens.
So the police take Oswald out to transfer him to the county jail from the police headquarters. And who just so happens to be there but this random guy named Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby owned a local nightclub, and he ran up on Oswald, and on national TV, shot him point blank. Oswald was taken to the hospital, and Ruby was taken into custody.
They rushed Oswald into surgery trying to save him because, that's the murder of the president. He probably has some very important information. But it's reported that at 12 p.m. that he was critically wounded, and he died at 1:07 p.m. on the 24th.
So now that we got the cold, hard facts, let's talk a little bit more about the day. So the route that JFK took was actually not supposed to be his intended route. It changed the morning of the event. The first route would not have gone near the book depository at all.
Yeah, and according to the route map of the drive, if their motorcade had just stayed on Main Street like it was supposed to, Oswald never would have gotten the chance to see, much less hit, the president.
The route was changed the morning of, and the press knew the morning of, it seems. So the people at the book depository knew the morning of and no earlier, which leads us to consider that maybe Oswald didn't kill him because he didn't know about the route change. I mean, does someone just carry a rifle and shells with him to work at all times? It just raises too many questions. I mean, after the assassination, he had enough time to go home, grab a pistol before catching a bus, or maybe he forgot something at home and came back with his rifle. Either way, it is crazy.
I just wanted to mention that before we get into the actual theories. Now, one of the major theories is the grassy knoll. The main premise of this theory is that some eyewitnesses believe that they heard at least one shot from a nearby hill, which is now known as the infamous grassy knoll.
Police investigated the grassy knoll minutes after the supposed gunshot and weren't able to find a gunman, gun, cartridges, nothing that would support the grassy knoll theory. While you would expect that to be the end of the theory, no. Apparently a policeman's radio had been jammed open and the sound of the shot was recorded. This led to the House Select Committee of Assassinations to get sound experts to analyze the sound, and they concluded there was another shooter at the grassy knoll. Then a few years after that, another group looked at the analysis and found it was flawed, and the time was at least a minute off.
Then we have Jack Ruby. There's a theory that Jack Ruby didn't just kill Oswald for killing JFK, but actually to prevent Oswald from spilling information about some larger conspiracy theory. Jack Ruby has ties to the mob, and the mob didn't really like JFK due to several mob leaders having investments in Cuba, which JFK messed up with the Bay of Pigs. Also, Jack Ruby had access to the police station Oswald's being held at, and a terminal cancer, therefore he had the best access to Oswald and nothing to lose.
So the mob was angry at JFK, and Jack Ruby had ties to the mob. But how does that tie into Oswald? Well, that's where this theory has some issues. Throughout all the investigations done into the assassination of JFK, no solid evidence was found that links Oswald to the mob. Oswald's uncle knew some people in the mob, and he worked for a guy while in New Orleans who had some connections to the mob, but every connection is rather weak. So the question is, would the mob put out a hit on the President of the United States and use somebody with zero connection? Basically, all but one piece of the puzzle is there, and that's why it became such a prevalent theory.
Hold on, what about the Federal Reserve theory that we mentioned in the beginning? What's that all about?
I'm gonna be honest, it's really underwhelming. Basically, JFK signed Executive Order 11,110, which theories say would have taken away power from the Federal Reserve, and that the Reserve and a bunch of billionaires planned the assassination to maintain wealth and power. But the thing is that the Executive Order basically just moved presidential power to the Secretary of the Treasury, and JFK called for and signed legislation that would have strengthened the Federal Reserve. So once they got really pissed off about a single executive order that maybe technically weakened them, it couldn't have been them. It was a funny theory, though, so I figured I'd bring it up. Either way, those are just some of the many theories surrounding the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the rest is history.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. All of our sources are listed in the description box here in Chicago-style format. Be sure to stay tuned next week for our After the Pod on this episode. And until then, bye-bye.